O'Sullivan's Law, dreamt up by a former advisor to Margaret Thatcher, says that all organisations that are explicitly right-wing will, over time, become left-wing. This is the context that explains the retreat from Reithian principles to inform, educate and entertain, a mission enshrined in the BBC's Royal Charter, but that's now largely been put to one side in favour of a progressive political agenda, one that likes having a go at the government, likes to take a pop at Brexit, isn't in favour of what so many of the British people are in favour of. That's where the BBC is now. Its motto at Broadcasting House, this temple of the arts and muses, it is prayed may incline the ear of the people to whatsoever things are beautiful and honest. Beautiful and honest. We don't get a lot of that, and we don't get much treading of the path of wisdom and uprightness either. But the BBC, it seems to me, has become more political. Even in its day-to-day programmes, its dramas and its soaps are inculcated with a view of the world that may be popular in the fashionable Islingtonian dining rooms, but aren't true for the rest of the United Kingdom. Left-wing orthodoxies are thrown at us, even in things like EastEnders. Brexit is unpopular. Promoting the sexual revolution and the more extreme climate change agenda is all in the BBC's meat and drink. But this is a problem, not because of it being wrong or being bad or being a point of view that people shouldn't hold. People are entitled to their views. I'm all in favour of freedom of speech. I say this again and again. People must be free to express their views, even if they offend. The problem is that the BBC is funded by a medieval-style poll tax. Think of what Richard II had to do as a schoolboy when, on Blackheath, he faced down the poll tax, the revolt that had come about because of trying to tax people unfairly and improperly. This is what the BBC does. We all have to pay it, whether we watch the BBC or not, if we watch any live television. But actually, it's held the BBC back. Let me explain. The BBC was at one point in its history one of the great broadcasters in the world. It's great by reputation, it was great by revenue, it was great by range. But in recent years, it has been static, stagnant even, whilst others have gone a lot higher and faster. So the BBC's revenue, predominantly poll tax, licence fee derived, has been about £5 billion a year each year since 2010. Compare that to Netflix. Netflix had just over half the BBC's revenue a decade ago, at about £3 billion, and a small 90 million profit. By 2022, Netflix was at 5 times the revenue of the BBC and was making lots of money as well. Sky, which didn't exist, well, nor did Netflix exist, but Sky didn't exist until the end of the 1980s, now has more than 3 times the revenue of the BBC. And this is important because Sky has bought up all the sports reporting. Most of the football is on Sky, not on the BBC. The BBC may have a very expensive match of the day, but it doesn't have the day-in, day-out Premier League matches because they're on Sky. Why? Because Sky has £16.5 billion in revenue, the BBC only about £5 billion. Netflix is making the most expensive dramas. Why? Because it's got £26 billion of revenues against £5 billion for the BBC. So this great national institution has been responsible for its own decline through the comfort blanket of the licence fee that has meant that it hasn't needed to get out there and raise revenue for itself. Look at the iPlayer. Brilliant invention. Many of it use it. But it's free if you're a licence fee payer. That should have been used for revenue so that the BBC could be more competitive and more effective. And if it did this, then like the American broadcasters like CNN and ABC, it could be on the left. And that would be fine because we wouldn't all be paying a tax for it. Now, there are bits at the BBC, like the World Service, that receive some subsidy from the government. They're different, they're separate. They are only part licence fee funded, but the main bulk of it needs to be freed up so that the BBC competes. Because if the BBC competes, it will do better, it can regain its position as a globally leading media company, and it can have its views, it can have its annoying lefty views, and it can leave other people to have sensible right-wing views. And then no one would mind because it wouldn't be paid for by a poll tax and they wouldn't be prosecuting primarily women who don't always remember to pay this poll tax. This is a real challenge for the BBC. We don't need it as a state-funded broadcaster. We want to have a great British company doing well, which would do much better if its resources were less limited and it was less dependent on the comfort blanket. So if you're of the Mr. Lineker persuasion, go to the BBC, talk about left-wing things, tweet left-wing things, disagree with the government. That's great. And we'll keep the Reithian principles at GB News and on State of the Nation.